Hi, I'm Heather Cole with Lodestar Solutions, and welcome to Software Demonstration Techniques. Many of us in our careers are responsible for rolling out software to end users or showing solutions to executives, and we need skills on how to demonstrate software. But when I went to school, they didn't have classes on software demonstration techniques. They just assumed if you knew the software, you could demonstrate it. Well, that's very far from the truth. I mean, I have a kitchen in my house, but that doesn't mean I could cook. So today I'm going to share with you my 20 plus years of software demonstration techniques that I've learned the hard way. So why should you care about software demonstration techniques? Well, first off, is if you're trying to get funding for your project, oftentimes you need to build your alliances within your organization. And so a good software demonstration can really get people on your team. Additionally, it can increase your end user adoption. And this is something many companies struggle with. People don't like change. So when you demonstrate your software, you need to make sure you encourage them why they want to embrace this new technology and embrace change. Being able to give a software demonstration can give you great exposure within your company, especially if you're demonstrating to executive teams. And at the end of the day, we all want to be promoted. And being able to show that you're knowledgeable, you're well-spoken, and you can present is a surefire way to help yourself get promoted within your organization. Okay, so let's talk about software demonstration killers. You know, these are the things that we see. Have you ever seen a software demonstration and you're sitting there going, oh my God, shoot me, this person is so boring. So we're going to talk about what those techniques are that they're not engaging in and why they're kind of not hitting the mark. The first one are people that show every field in the system. They kind of go across the screens going, oh, and we can click here and we can do this. That's called the feature functionality demonstration, and it will kill you. It's one, going to put your audience to sleep, but it does not show how you're going to solve a problem. In fact, it makes it look a lot more complex. So you want to make sure that you're not doing that. Oftentimes, this is also referred to as a data dump. The goal is not to show how smart you are. The goal is to show how awesome your solution is. So if anything, you want to dumb down your presentations to make it so everyone in the room can understand your technology, no matter how advanced it is. A lack of prep is definitely reflected in your presentation. I'm amazed how many times people tell me, oh yeah, we're going to demonstrate our solution, you know, the new model that we built to the executive team today. And I'm like, well, did you do dry runs? Did you do videos? What did you do? And they're like, well, no, we're just going to show it. And I'm like, whoa, this is a time for you to look like a rock star in your organization. You got to practice. Practice makes perfect. When we do screw up, don't highlight the screw ups. Oh my God, I totally messed that up. Let me go back and do that. Just retreat back to where you need to be and go through the process again. When people highlight their screw ups, that's when everybody notices. But remember, this is new technology for a lot of people. They're not even going to notice when you make a mistake. So don't highlight your mistakes. Please don't talk in a monotone voice where you always talk in the same. This is an opportunity to engage people. Look at it this way. When you read your small child or maybe your niece or nephew a storybook, do you talk in a monotone voice or do you give your character spirit and spunkiness? Right? You oftentimes use different inflections in your voice, and you want to do that when you present as well. There's a world-renowned speech coach or vocal coach named Roger Love, and I had the fortune of going to one of his sessions at the World's Greatest Speaker Academy, and in it, he taught you to treat your voice like music. It should get faster and slower and louder and softer. And so when you can use all the different qualities of pitch and sound, you make it engaging. You take them on a journey just like you do in music. So think about that as you're speaking and talking in your presentation. Your job is to become the storyteller. And when you tell a story, people will remember your story. Humans are not ideally set up to understand logic. They ideally are set up to understand stories. So if you're teaching a very complex subject, you want to make sure you put a story behind it. So you want to be the storyteller. The storyteller will allow us to set the atmosphere of our presentation. And when I talk about that, it's kind of like setting the stage for your audience to see where you're playing. For example, in my presentations, some of you have seen or heard me talk about Betty Lou. Betty Lou is always that person that is either slower in advancing technology, or she's kind of a bottleneck oftentimes in my stories. And so I kind of even talk about her in a different tone of voice. But I set the story with, well, sometimes we have to have the tough conversations that some people are not that analytically minded. You know, maybe like Betty Lou. Betty Lou could be really good at accounting, but maybe is not wired in her brain to be able to handle analytic work. And so I'll use those type of stories to set the stage or the foundation that, hey, you got to put the right people on your project. So that's an example of storytelling. Now, when you're in person, especially, try and use facial expressions to show feeling of your character. Do you know 93% of all communication is nonverbal? Now, granted, some of that includes pitch and tonality and power of your voice, but 93%, that's a big number. So please try and be in person for your presentations and show character, show a little life. If you're not that kind of person, pretend you're on stage in a theater production and be someone maybe you're not normally to get them engaged. Use your hands and shoulders and body language as much as you can to show objects or to, again, paint the story. Be expressive. So again, you can do this with your voice. You can do this with your body language. We already talked about this. Use your voice as melody and create characters or role play. There's how I use Betty Lou, or sometimes I'll bring in Bob. Well, you know, Bob needs to do things on his own. So he's going to do a data dump. And so we start talking the story about what Bob does in his job and how he's kind of breaking the rules of the software and how we can solve that problem. There's this great thing that I learned recently. I had done it for years, but I never knew it had a name. And it's called bounce. Bounce is when you bring your audience into your story. So I could use an example. I could say, you know, back in the day when I used to work with clients doing GL implementations, we'd have to create these templates, and we'd create hundreds of Excel files. We'd create these budget templates, and we'll email them out to everybody. And we'd have to ask them to fill them out and then collect them. And then I'd say, and you know, have you ever been in this situation where you're waiting for people to complete these templates and now you have to aggregate the data? As soon as I said, have you ever, that's what we call a bounce. It's bringing you, the audience, into my story. And so now you're relating with me. Now we're the same. I've been in your shoes. And when they get that feeling, that's the first step to winning their hearts. You'll also want to use analogies. I use tons of analogies. And the trick to this is just trying some things and see if they work. For example, years ago, I came up with an analogy for planning solutions about planning is like your house. So wouldn't it be great if I could have a house that would dynamically grow and shrink to meet my family's needs? So, for example, I'm single, I have a one-car garage, you know, I have an exercise room, and then suddenly I meet someone, I get married, and now it goes to a two-car garage, and we have kids, and now it gets bigger, and the in-laws come, and the side of the house comes in with soundproof soundproof walls and chain locks, and then when they leave, it can shrink back down again. Wouldn't that be awesome? Is to have a dynamic house. Well, that's what our planning solution is. It can grow and shrink to meet our business needs. So I just tied home building to my planning solution. And when I do that, I get everyone that has ever built a house or bought a house engaged, which is typically most of your audience. Well, I first used this analogy, and the CFO of a major company was in the room. About 2 hours later, after the demo, we were taking a break, we walk out in the hall, and the CFO comes up to me and says, "Did you know I was building a house right now?" And I kind of laughed, and I said, "No, I had no idea." And what it proved to me is that he remembered my story from 2 hours earlier. And then the other thing that happened with that same presentation is about 2 weeks later, I was out with the same sales rep. And I was the pre-sales person at the time. And I heard the sales rep give my analogy to another client. And I knew right then and there that if someone repeats it, it's a good analogy. So try and think of analogies. If you get stuck, give me a shout. I have tons of them, and my stories are your stories. So think of your world's greatest corporate storyteller. Who comes to mind? To me, it's none other than Steve Jobs. This was a man that was marvelous at telling a story and simplifying things to solve a solution. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So the next step to a good demonstration is knowing your audience. You need to know their needs. And we have some other presentations that go into more of the psychology of things, but most of our executives and most finance people, most of our end users want what we call certainty. So you need to give them a roadmap of how this is going to help them and how it's going to impact them. So give them that tour guide roadmap of what they're about to see. You need to know their goals. What are their personal goals? What are the corporate goals? And how can you help them with your solution? You need to watch your language. And what I mean by that is avoid jargon. If you're starting to talk about ODBC connections and your audience are people that wouldn't know what that is, you're just going to lose them. And then, one, you make them feel stupid, right? Because you're sitting there. Have you ever been in a meeting where, someone spouts off this acronym and you're like, I don't know what that means. Am I stupid? Am I the only person in the room that doesn't know what this means? I've been there many times in IBM land. They're all acronyms, and I don't know what half of them mean. So then I start Googling, right? But don't just do it. If someone in the room uses an acronym that others might not know, help the other people out. Say, oh, an ODBC connection, you mean when you grab data from an external source, then you bring it in and try and explain it to them. Think about how they receive information. And this is really, really important when you're dealing with executives. So certain people talk really fast. They're Speedy Gonzalez, right? Blah, blah, blah. That's me, right? They also may have a little case of ADD, right? Do you ever have that executive that is bouncing off topics? They're like a super ball bouncing all over. Well, you need to present to them in their style. And here's a perfect example of that. About 6 years ago, I was working with a client and they got a new CFO. And about 3 months after the CFO arrived, they called me in and said, Heather, can you do us a big favor? Can you demonstrate our planning solution to the CFO? We want you to show him what we've done with the software. I'm like, sure, great, no problem, I'll come in. And they said, but here's the catch. Don't worry, he only sits for 15 minutes. He never has sat in a meeting for more than 15 minutes. Now, this struck me as somewhat odd, because if the information was informative and useful, he should stay, right? So I asked a few more questions and tried to get in a personality profile on this person. And I said, does he seem like he multitasks a lot? And they said, oh yeah, always. And he's always distracted. And I said, I got this one. So I get in the presentation and I start talking like at warp speed. Now, I lost most of the room, but I didn't care. My whole goal was to present to this one guy. Everybody else knew the solution. So I was talking really fast and I was bouncing all over. And an hour and 15 minutes, we had to wrap it up because people kicked us out of the conference room. And he was still sitting there asking questions. We walk out of the room, and my contact, the controller, she walks up to me and she says, Heather, what the heck just happened? I've never seen anything like it. This man never stays in a meeting. And I said, oh, it's really simple. My ADD trumped his ADD. And he was feeling very comfortable at the pace and the kind of disjointed nature of my presentation. I said, I'm going to give you some cliff notes in working with your boss. So I taught her how to present to him, how to even write emails to him, always kind of the cliff note version of it, right? So that he knows it's presenting at his speed. So think about your audience. If they're slower speakers, you want to slow that down. Also, think about if you have a lot of foreign people in the room who English may not be their first language, you want to talk a little bit slower. I gave a presentation once where 80% of the room were from other countries, and I get up there doing the Heatherism, talking fast, and the guy in the back of the room is giving me this slow down symbol. And then I just kind of laughed and owned it, and I said, I'm sorry, I forgot most of you are translating me. I will slow it down, and they all applauded me. Make sure that you do diligent discovery on their thoughts on the topic you're presenting. So you want to kind of ask people, get a vibe, maybe read your financial reports or go watch some of your earnings announcements to get a vibe of how this particular presentation or the topic you're presenting might help the company achieve its bigger goals. And that really gives you a lot of meat to your presentation. The most important thing you can do is actively listen. So here's the thing about us analytically minded people, right? We tend to solve problems. Someone says, oh, I have this problem, and our brain immediately goes and tries to solve the problem, right? But we've missed the other 4 or 5 statements that came afterwards that might have been just as important. So check your brain at the door when you're talking to people and doing your discovery. I love this little cartoon strip. I'm sorry, were you talking to me? I mean, they're clearly on a desert island, right? So think about turning your brain off, taking diligent notes, acting like you know nothing, and then solve the problem after you leave the office. So practice makes perfect. This goes for many of you were athletes growing up. Maybe you still are, right? You practice. Same thing for your presentation. It is the most important thing you can do. So the first thing you want to do is outline your storyline. Talk about how you're going to tie things together, what problems you're going to solve, what benefits the software gives to your audience, and outline that storyline. If you don't know your subject really deeply, call it a lifeline. So, for example, let's say you're deploying Cognos software and you are an expert in it, but maybe you've recently learned TM1 and you're going to deploy TM1 and you're like, oh, I don't know, they might ask questions, I don't know the answer. Then call Lodestar. We could even help you with a presentation. We could be on the phone in the event that you got asked a question you don't know the answer to. Sometimes we can just be your security blanket, right? In case something goes wrong. 99% of the time it does not go wrong, but it gives you a little vote of confidence. I believe in videotaping or using Camtasia to do my practice runs. Then I can play them back and realize where I'm kind of not so clear or where I need to refine my presentation. Camtasia is a software that I use to record this presentation. It allows us to give our whole demonstration, recording our screen as well as our voice. It can also bring in movies from your iPhone, so it's really beneficial to be able to see how you're presenting and see any unique mannerisms you have, like playing with a necklace or twirling your hair if you're a girl. So don't walk without a net. Practice, practice, practice. You want to make sure the environment is optimal for your presentation. So when you're presenting, make sure you're maximizing your windows. Set your screen settings so the font is big. Why? Because the people in the way back of the room want to see this, especially if you're dealing with financial information. Minimize the mouse movements and screens. So I saw this demo once where someone's like moving their mouse like all over the place, and they kept clicking on other screens. And I look at the COO, at the client, and they looked like they were getting dizzy. And I finally had to make a joke about it. I'm like, can you please stop moving your mouse around so much? You're making us dizzy. And everyone laughed, and the COO in the room kind of, it diffused it a little bit. And she looked at me and said, yeah, you're absolutely right. So make sure you're not moving your mouse all over. That's also a sign of nervousness, by the way. Leverage a whiteboard for diagrams. I like to mix media, not just the presentation on the screen, but go over and maybe diagram out the solution so that you can keep referring. Now we're over in this section, and you can point to where you are on that whiteboard. Stand up and walk around the room. So this engages the people in the back of the audience as well. So when you're using PowerPoint, typical guidelines are less than 20 slides. Less slides, the better. People want you to hop right into the product, right? Don't do this laborious, oh, we looked at 500 vendors and this is what we came up with. Just get in, couple slide background, and get out. Typically, you want less than 6 primary bullet points. And I like to have pictures in my slides. Why? It adds a little visual, something to look at instead of just a bunch of words. So there's lots of clip art images you can put in here. You can find them on the internet. Do be careful and make sure they're ones that you can legally use. I also like to use animation. Animation is what makes it so that one bullet point at a time pops up. It's very easy to use in PowerPoint. Test it out. And then finally, you can add some comic strips or video clips in your presentation. If you're dealing with Cognos, they have some amazing short little 3-minute customer success stories on different applications that you might want to add to your presentation, giving it a different kind of speed or pace and changing it up a little bit. Now, you definitely want to check your machine for performance. So you want to cache your work to speed up the rendering if you're doing like BI reports. Turn off other apps like Instant Messenger and Mail. You don't want suddenly your email popping up in the corner. And you want to make sure that you frame expectations. So what I notice a lot of times when I'm doing a go-to-meeting is that the go-to-meeting will slow down the rendering on the client's side. So mine will render, but the clients will take forever. So I set the stage very early on. Hey, if I seem to be talking well advanced of your picture, let me know and I'll slow my speech down so we can accommodate for the time delay in the presentation. So now let's get into your introduction. An introduction is just setting the foundation for your presentation. It's so important. So the first thing that you want to do is to start out with your story, right? Hi, I'm Heather Cole. I'm president of Lodestar Solutions, and I've been giving software demonstrations for, better part of 20 years. Here's what I've learned along the way. So you start a little kind of tagline about what you're about. Always share why they should pay attention. So you want to give them an appetizer of this is what you're going to learn from this and this is why it's important. If you're doing software that's identifying a process flow, talk about here's what we do today. And then share your options. So we explored a bunch of solutions and here's the solution that we came up with. Bring in examples of others in your industry that have done the same thing. That shows that there's kind of credibility in your industry with the solution set that you brought in. If you have multiple presenters doing a tag team thing, make sure you define your roles and designate one person as the scribe. I love to have detailed notes after my demo where it says, Betty Lou said blah, 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 and any of the key points that were brought up during the presentation. Then what I do is I type those up and I send them to everyone that was in the meeting, and they think that's very valuable, once again, making me or my people that I'm working with look really good. So most off, you gotta make it fun. If they're not having fun, they're not learning as much as they could. So joke around, make sure you make it entertaining. Now, when you're actually doing the presenting, you want to think about a few things. The first one is you need to breathe. Some of you get nervous and you start not breathing as much, and either your voice is going to go really high, or some of you start to gasp for air. Have you ever seen a presenter where it sounds like they're always running out of air? So want to make sure that you breathe on the commas and the periods. Watch out for ums, and make sure your voice is a melody. Give it pitch. Watch your pace, especially with foreign speakers in the room. Watch your mannerisms. I've noticed when I play back my recordings, I like the word so. I go, so, blah, 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 right? I also twirl a pin when I'm in present. So I got to watch that. And never say, to be honest. When you're saying, to be honest, it kind of assumes you're lying the rest of the time. I prefer the word candidly. You know, if you're about to tell them something maybe they don't want to hear. And absolutely no gum. I mentioned earlier, nonverbal is 93% of all communication. So you need to learn to read it. There's a great book called What Everybody is Saying by Joe Navarro. And he's a former FBI agent and teaches you all about reading body language. I highly recommend it. You will be shocked what you learn by just watching people. Never assume you know what they're thinking. Assume you know nothing and ask. One, it makes certain that you don't make yourself look like a fool, but it also builds trust with them because they know you're actually caring about them. So never assume. Some of us get really good at what we do, and we've been doing it for years, and we're like, I've heard everything. I know what the guy's going to say next. He's going to say he wants the software to do X, Y, and Z. But try and turn that part of your brain off and be open, because every now and then they'll throw you a curveball. So you want to make sure that you're direct to the point, and you must add value to show the ease of it. If you're rambling on and on and on, guess what? You're going to lose them, and they're going to be like, oh my gosh, that was so complex. Just in, out, clean. It's Cliff Note version of the software. You want to make sure that you make it easy. You don't want to show everything. You want to gain their trust. Openly identify challenges and weaknesses. And so especially when you're giving this internally and you want to build more credibility, say, here has been our challenge, or this will be a challenge. For example, a challenge might be that the organization hasn't assigned enough resources to this project. So that's going to be a challenge because I have to do my regular job and implement this solution. Stop showing when they love it and trust you. So you know that point in your demonstration where they're all nodding their heads, they're smiling, they love it, they love it. That's when you're done going into detail. Then when they ask a question, it's simple, yes, we can. And you don't dive in and show it. You don't have to show everything at that time. There's an old saying in sales that when they say they want it, you shut up, because all you can do from there is lose it. So make sure that when they ask you, can you clarify and say, we can, but you should be asking the question, should we? And then go into your thoughts on that. What that does is that also builds credibility. Too many times with software, people are like, yeah, we can do it. We physically can do it, but that doesn't mean we should. And that's an opportunity to maybe adjust some other things in the organization to solve some problems. Okay, so the format and the focus of your presentation. Make your introductions personal and interesting. You might want to practice this, script a few things, kind of play with it, talk to your spouse, give it to them, see if they like it. Make sure it's easy to understand. Then you're going to define why they should listen, why it's a priority, who should care about what you're presenting, and what is your goal. Start with a wow. Make the biggest challenge first. Now, there's some debate on this. Some people say save the best for last. I don't agree with that. And here's why. A lot of times the executives will be in the room early on, and then they'll leave. They'll get called out. So if you can wow them in the beginning, and if they get called out, you're okay. You wowed them. So put the biggest challenge, the biggest bang for the buck up front. You want to make sure you clarify what your goal in the presentation is. For example, you might say, my goal is to have you understand how we can solve blah, 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 blah. This solution is going to impact all of us, and tell them kind of why or how. And we can easily take advantage of this and realize the benefits of. So that's kind of a framework for you on how you're going to be able to set a roadmap for them. Focus your presentation on 3 to 4 key points with benefits. You don't need to show everything. This is not a training session. This is a demonstration. And you want to make sure you're communicating how this will make or save the company money or reduce substantial risk. At the end of the day, that's your secret to getting funding, how to make or save the company money. Then demonstrate your solution in a story format, a day in the life of Betty Lou, right? How does she do it today, and how are you going to make it much more efficient for Betty Lou? When you're talking about your key point, make sure that you start with why for each key point. So why should you show me this? For example, let's say I'm going to show the Excel functionality of TM1. I might say, you know how you still love your Excel? Well, I'm now going to show you how we can take all this great information we have in TM1 and push that to Excel and then leverage Excel. That way you can still have your Excel and still leverage the great data that we have in our TM1 solution. So I set up the framework of what I'm going to tell them. So I tell them why I'm going to go through this exercise so that we can solve and have our Excel. And then I show them. And then I summarize by telling them what I just showed them. So now you see, I've been able to show how we would leverage Excel with the TM1 functionality. And that format, tell them what you're going to tell them and why, show them, and tell them what you told them, allows for it to impact and that everyone will understand what you're doing. Even if they kind of dazed off for a few minutes, they'll still catch it on the third time around. So your job is to create a roadmap. You want to tell them what you're going to tell them, show them, tell them what you showed them. You're going to engage them in two-way dialogue to let them explore. So this is like the bounce. So you know when, or have you ever experienced and let them, respond to that? And maybe, Betty Lou, tell me, have you had this challenge before? Ideally, you want to find someone that's going to be more vocal. Again, reading their nonverbal, you'll be able to tell which ones in the room are going to play with you, right? To be able to engage with you. Some people will never speak in a presentation. If you call them out, you're just going to make them uncomfortable. So watch out for that. Address their, you might be thinking, well, how are we going to do X, Y, and Z? If you do that, they think you're reading their freaking mind. It is like amazing what happens. So, how did you know what I was thinking? Well, a lot of times it's the same thing everybody else was thinking, right? So make sure you kind of address that. Make sure you cover how you would implement it. That gives them to their certainty. In order to implement this, we'd have to start in January, and here's how we would do it. Make sure you review the takeaways and a call to action. Make sure that you have a Q&A session at the end. Now, there's some tricks to the Q&A session that we can talk about, making certain that you always repeat the question that they ask. Why do you do that? Someone in the room might not have heard it. If someone's in the front of the room and they ask you a question, the people in the back of the room probably did not hear it. Additionally, if you have people that are on speakerphone or dialing in virtually, they definitely won't hear it. So it's your job as the presenter to make sure that you articulate or reiterate that question, and then make sure that you address it directly. If you don't know the answer to the question, that's okay. Just admit it and just say, hey, I am not really certain. Let me take that as a takeaway. Define your next steps. So we had here's what we are going to do next. And give your closing remarks. I thank you for your time today. We look forward to implementing the solution, and summarize why they should want your solution and embrace it. Okay, so I love this quote from Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Every time you present, think about this quote. Make it fun for them. Have energy. Make sure you're up for the presentation. If you have to drink an extra cup of coffee that afternoon, go for it. But you want to come in with passion. It will reflect in your presentation. So during your question and answer session, this is really crucial that you get it right. The first thing is, don't ever cut off the question, even if you know what they're going to ask. I see presenters do this all the time. I'm like, shush, just don't cut them off. Let them go. Even though someone may be doing this long-winded story before they get the question out, let them go. Repeat the question. Slow down when you repeat the question. And the reason why you do that is you appear to be much more thoughtful. You may know that answer just like, bam, I had this one. But you're actually showing them respect. Like, wow, this is a really good question. So slow it down and slow your answer down so people can kind of think while they're processing that. If you don't know the answer, contemplate it, admit you don't know it, and write it down and repeat it back. Now, I don't like writing these on a whiteboard or on a flip chart because all it does is show what I didn't know, and I don't like to highlight that. I write it in my journal, and I repeat it back. Why do I repeat it back? I need to make certain I understand the question fully, and they may add more information to it too. I like to leave a couple questions open, even if I know all the answers, so I have a reason to circle back with them in a day or two. Why is this important for you? You want to get a vibe what they thought. They're processing your presentation. They're going to go back to their desk and they're going to think about it more. You want to be able to reach back out to the team and ask them what they thought of it. If you have follow-up questions, it gives you an excuse to do that. Always, always, always have a backup plan. It's Murphy's Law. The projector will die. Your network connection will die. Something will happen. I've had horror stories on this, and I don't want you to be in the place that I was. The first rule of thumb is to make a PowerPoint deck with screenshots. So screenshot your solution and all the steps that you're going to show of the software and put those into a PowerPoint presentation. That way, if you lose connection, something happens, and by the way, give that PowerPoint presentation to someone else in the room. Have it on their laptop too. If something happens, your laptop dies, you can easily bring that up and walk through the slides and say, this isn't live, but here we'll walk you through the solution. Now you didn't waste their time, and people are like, wow, you recovered nicely. Now, if you don't need the PowerPoint deck, which I hope you don't ever, at the end of the demo, you send it to them and say, this is what you saw, and you have notes in the PowerPoint deck. You look very buttoned down. Record a practice session. I'm a big favor of this. Camtasia can help you do it. Sometimes you can even play that recording, or if someone missed it at the last minute, little Johnny got the flu and the CFO had to leave and couldn't watch your presentation, you could always send them a recording of your practice. When your system crashes or something happens, cover the projector. Just take a piece of paper, stick it right into the projector, and hopefully you have a partner in crime that can start talking. So if I'm with someone else and they're presenting and something looks like it's not going well, I will move to the other side of the room, away from them, and I will start asking questions and engage the audience. What I'm doing is I'm moving their eye away from the screen, which now they have covered up, so the person can fix their computer and it relieves their stress level. So have a partner in crime that you can like flip it over if you have a problem. Record your live sessions, and that way people that missed it can have it, or if there's follow-up, they want to see it again. I found that this is very beneficial because someone might say, I really wish that Bob was there. And then you can just say, well, let me give Bob the presentation. So that's me. Please reach out and let's get connected. I am Heather Cole. Here's my email address and phone number that you can reach me at. I do get on Twitter. I'm at Heatherize, and I have a new website called heatherize.com to help analytically minded professionals up their game and learn new skills. So check us out there as well. Thank you for your time today, and everyone have an awesome day.